All right. Good morning, everyone. Sorry about the rocky start on this one. We redid the course, and we had a break for about 3 months because, as most of you probably have heard, they've updated the CMMC model over the last 6 months or so. So we're going to be using the new materials today, and we'll go over what the updates were and so on. But in doing so, I think we used a different Zoom link. Yeah, I'm not sure why it's different. I thought it was the same process, but I don't know. Maybe something has been updated on it. But anyhow, we will record these sessions, and we've given all these access to the new Canvas website that has the new materials in it. So it's on canvas.infrastructure.com. It's the open source Canvas site. So you can always go in and just do you can do a snapshot of the course and import it into your own, or convert it if you're using something other than Canvas. Okay. So all the way through, we've been sharing the materials. So, all right. Let me introduce myself real quick, and then we'll just go around the room and let everyone introduce themselves. So my name is John Sands. I'm with Moraine Valley Community College. I see a lot of familiar faces out there. I'm the director of the Center for System Security and Information Assurance. And this course is brought to you through the new NSF Insight Center. And we have Corinne Sandy here, who's the PI for that. So I'll pass the ball to you next. So.
Hi, everybody. I know most of you, but just in case, I'm Corinne Sandy, and I'm the PI and director for the Insight Center at Whatcom Community College. So this is the new National ATE Center for Cybersecurity Education.
All right. And I think we'll just go around the room real quick. I know we're going to have a couple more people joining us, but Christine, you want to take it next?
Sure. My name is Christine Christensen. I teach at Moraine Valley Community College, and I have the opportunity to work with John. So I'm excited. I've been working on the CMMC for a while now. So I'm just excited to be part of this community. So it's nice to meet all of you.
And I think Jonathan next. Yerby?
I'm Jonathan Yerby. I'm an associate professor at Mercer University in Macon, Georgia. Oh. And I'm also the director of our Cyber Operations Research and Education Center.
All right, welcome. Hey, Chris, you're next.
Okay. Hi, I'm Chris Rondo with Bossier Parish Community College. I'm over our network security project here. I also work with 3CS for Cyber Summit Conference, and I'm the POC on all of our CAE stuff.
All right. And Joe, you're next.
Yes. Good morning. My name is Joe Maroney. I am an adjunct professor at Capital Technology University here in Laurel, Maryland. And I'm glad to be here. We teach our cybersecurity out here. And thank you.
All right. Welcome. Stan?
Sure, John. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Stan Mirswa. I am with Kane University in Union, New Jersey. I am the POC for our CAE. And I teach courses here at Kane University, and also help run the Center for Cybersecurity. Happy to be here, and a lot of names I've seen over the past year, emails, and it's nice to get together with everyone. And I hope to contribute more to the community going forward.
Yeah, I get teased at school that I know like faculty and people from the cyber community better than the faculty here at our own institution. You know, it's true. Spend so much time with them, you know. So. Yeah. All right, Mike. Hey, so you'll be here soon. So you're going to come virtual, and then you'll be in person later, huh?
That's right. Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Kesani. I'm from Brookdale Community College in Lincroft, New Jersey. I actually live in Union, so I'm right down the street from Stan at Kane University. And congratulations on getting your designation, Stan. I'll be teaching some of the sessions tomorrow. I'll actually be doing that from Chicago as I'm flying in, leaving from Union here to go to Chicago in a little bit, but looking forward to working with all of you on the CMMC. Again, this is really important for our business and industry that supports our defense industrial base.
All right, thanks, Mike. Guillermo?
Hi, I'm Guillermo Francia. I'm a faculty scholar and professor at the University of West Florida. We'll be teaching a CMMC course in June, and hopefully, most likely, we're going to be using most of your materials. If you
All
don't
right.
mind.
Yeah, we got a lot of stuff for you. So,
Thank you so much.
yeah, we had that pleasure of visiting you 2 years ago when they had the executive summary there and got to see your labs and all that. Pretty impressive.
Thank you.
Hernando? Hernando, I think you're muted. There you go.
Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? Sorry about that. I'm not sure if I'm in the right place, but I think I am with so many smart people. No, I'm new to the industry. I'm working with my brother who runs a company out of Washington, D.C., and we're a cybersecurity company, Cyber Guardian Threat Solutions, and I just recently got my RP and RPO just before this whole CMMC 2.0 came out. So I'm on board to learn from the best of the best here. Thank you for having me.
All right, you're welcome. Faisal?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Faisal Kaleem, a professor here at Minnesota State University, Twin Cities. I'm also the executive director for the Min Cyber Center that we established a couple of years back. Glad to be here. Thank you.
All right, and Joseph?
Good morning, everybody. Joe Murdoch from University of Colorado, Denver, faculty in our business school. Yeah, glad to be here.
All right, and Yang?
Hi, I'm a faculty in University of Colorado at Colorado Springs.
Okay.
So the same CU system. I am in the computer science department, and I'm looking to apply for a CC STAR grant. And some of the issues in the proposal is related to compliance. So that's why I'm here.
All right.
Deidre.
I'm trying to figure, it's mixing up the screen.
Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Deidre Evans with Florida A&M University, faculty member in the Department of Computer and Information Sciences. Glad to be here.
All right, welcome. Just talked to you the other day, right?
Yes, we did.
All right, and if anyone I'm missing? Oh wait, Herrera.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Edwin Herrera. I'm the system administrator for ChromoLogic. We're a biomedical research company, and we do contracts with the DoD. So we're looking to become NIST compliant.
All right. So I'm sure we'll have some people. We get a lot of faculty in these classes that have classes and so on. And they pop in and out as we go through it. So we do record everything, and then, like I said, we'll give you access to everything in the course when we're done. But the way we're going to do this over the next 2 days is that we have different faculty from around the country teach different aspects of it. So we're going to start off this morning by just going through the CMMC model itself. We'll talk about the difference between version 1 and version 2. Then we go into a little bit about preparing for an audit, and Christine will share with you some tools that are available. The one tool that we specifically use will be updated soon to reflect the changes to 2.2. And by the way, it's the Heartland Institute at University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. They're the ones that create the security dashboard that we're going to be using. But they've stepped up, and we're going to have a course specifically on their dashboard when everything is done. But they've also said that they want to present everyone that goes through this training with an honor coin. So we're going to get your contact information and your shipping or mailing address, and we'll send a coin out to you before the course ends. So I thought it's sort of nice. They're going to get you a coin talking about that will represent their dashboard and a little bit about their center and so on. So for you that collect honor coins, it'd be sort of cool. All right. And they may be joining us. I'm not sure if they're going to join us tomorrow, but we've invited them. But they'll come in and they'll talk about that. One of the things that we're doing as part of this is giving you access to that tool. If you go through, we have like a very short, 4-hour thing of how to use it, right, to perform an audit. And you have to do a couple things because we want to make sure you have a good impression of it, you know how to use it and so on. But you'll be able to use it for your classes then, and show students an actual product that you could use in organizing your information as you proceed through or prepare for an audit. So they have volunteered to give free access to all educators and their students. And like I said, they're still catching up though. And they're waiting on a couple things with the changes to the 2.0. We sort of charged ahead because we just know there's lots of opportunity out there for people right now. So we wanted to get the stuff out there as soon as we could. Although they're still, bringing on new aspects of the program and so on. So we will keep you up to date for any kind of changes that occur in the near future. All right. For you that are interested, they do have the CMMC accreditation board has a monthly meeting where they're releasing, changes to the program. They've identified now certified trainers, which we've applied for and received. So what that basically means is, if you go through our training and you take the exam and so on, you have gone through certified, recognized training. And we're encouraging more schools to look at pursuing that, because when you think about, training people from over 300,000 different, companies that have contracts with DoD, there's going to be a huge need for trainers. And they really feel that colleges will help fill that void. But right now there's a handful of certified trainers, and now there's a handful of publishers. We're applying to be a publisher as well. So we'll be able to publish our materials and have the official CMMC stamp on it. But just so you know, our website and our content is our content. We have not been fully recognized yet as a publisher. We're in the process, but DoD is slowly bringing them on one at a time, and you sort of got to prove your mettle with them before they'll give you the designation. Okay, so that's just a little bit about where we're at and what we're doing with this. So let me just give you a little of our rationale why we got involved with this, and then we'll jump right into it. So, when I first read about what was happening in this space, and by the way, it's happening more than just the Department of the DIB. I mean, it's more than just defense contractors. We are going to start to see contractors with all federal agencies, and you're starting to see it in just about every vertical market that companies want to be able to trust their corporate partners and the systems and their corporate partners and so on. And one way of building that trust is to have organizations be forced to go through audits, whether those are self audits or external audits, to actually test their capabilities, their processes and controls and so on. And that's what CMC is really all about. It's going from a model where everything was just self-reported and we trust you because we gave you a framework and we expected you to implement the framework, to now proving to the federal government that you have gone through internal audits and you've actually checked your controls in the different domains and you have those specific capabilities. The really strange thing about the new model, the old model, they built everything on capabilities, right? They talked about your capabilities in each one of these areas, but they don't use that term now, which I find very strange, but I still use it. And I think we're going to continue to use it because I think it just makes sense. So as we go through, some of the materials that we've developed, we've left that in only because I think, as far as students are concerned, it makes sense to students, what a capability is, and a capability is measured by your ability to implement different controls and processes. Okay. So, but again, our motivation is that we feel that even though I'm at a 2-year college, and most of our students are really the technical workforce, they're not necessarily going to be the auditors, but they're going to be the people that do things, right? They're the ones that are going to deploy the VPNs, and they're going to, implement the security on our devices and manage the authentication and authorization processes, they too need to be familiar with a security audit and a compliance program. Why? Why do they need to be familiar with it? They're not going to be auditors necessarily, right? Well, the auditors really don't carry out most of the work, right? They depend on the people that specifically carry out the work, right? And when you go through an audit is just like a financial audit. They're not looking for mistakes in your calculations, right? They're looking at your processes, right? Which result in those mistakes, right? So do you have processes that will catch, issues with your systems, weaknesses within your programs, and so on? And how do they do that? Well, we'll walk through the process of what a security audit is all about, and the three ways that we collect information in a security audit. But one of them, which is really important, that Christine's going to talk about later, is a big part of all audits are interviews, right? And who are they going to interview? They're going to interview our students. So part of what we want to happen in this course, because we've implemented this in one of our advanced courses, is that we want students to understand you're going to be part of this process, and you need to understand that your organization is probably going to go through audits, and you will be part of that audit. And how do you prepare for it? What kind of things are you going to be asked, and so on. So that's why we feel it's important to incorporate this within our curriculum. And we just feel it's going to result in, just huge number of new jobs. I mean, when you see the projections in the new jobs, I think they fail to recognize that there's going to be a large impact from these new programs in the new jobs in cybersecurity as well. So that was our rationale why we decided to pursue this. So Christine and I and others have attended the meetings where we attend the CMMC AB board meetings on a regular basis. We forked up the money to apply for the designation of being an official trainer, and then we went through the process. So we want to go for the next step. So we're going to be sitting through the new exam here soon. And for those of you that are interested, I'll bring you to the website, show you how you can get involved. And, if it's something you think your institution would want to also promote within your local industry base, it's something we'd probably encourage you to do, because we see a lot of opportunity out there. We've had numerous companies come to us and ask us if we could, offer this same training to their employees. Okay. So that's a little bit about the rationale why we pursued this. And we'll go ahead and get started then with the course itself then. Any questions before we get started? Okay.
On that, John, on the toolkit that you said would be available, is that available just for educational purposes, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. No, you can commercially buy the service itself, and we'll show it to you. And they've the whole pricing thing is up there and so on. But for training, they do offer it for free. If you're going to use it in a production environment, then it's an actual product.
Okay.
But it was developed by the center at University of Illinois through one of their for-profit partners. And we just think it's an awesome tool. When you see it, I think you'll be pretty impressed with it. So, all right. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So to understand the whole reasoning and a motivation of Congress pushing this, you have to sort of go back and look at the idea of controlled information, right? Now, the CMMC specifically focuses on a specific category of controlled or classified information or unclassified information. And in this case, it's called CUI. Has everyone heard of that term, CUI? So for those of you that have not heard of it, it stands for Controlled Unclassified Information. The CMMC program is all about protecting that information and protecting federal contract information. So that's what the whole idea is. So this is the entry level into getting an entire infrastructure to a higher level of maturity and a higher level of security is we have to start off by, what is the foundational information? Well, again, this program covers contractors, right? Contractors with the Department of Defense. Is there sensitive information in those contracts? You better believe there's a lot of sensitive information, right? And even what they're asking to have contracted could be sensitive in many cases, right? So CMMC is really focused around controlled unclassified information and federal contract information. Those are the two big categories of information that the CMMC was designed for, right? When we get to controlled information or classified information, there's a whole nother series of standards and controls that organizations have to follow. But all organizations will have to abide by this. So in other words, anyone that contracts with the federal government for a DoD contract in the near future, 2025 is a target dates, will have to meet requirements for CMMC. So what we've done for you here is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, I'm in the Canvas course itself. So you probably, when you go in, you're going to see home, and that sort of lists out, the Zoom link and then each of the modules that we created for this. I'm going to go to modules for this section. So when I click on modules, for you that are familiar with Canvas, it opens up the individual modules where we can store things. And if I go into controlled environments, what these are our series of videos that were developed most in partnership with Carnegie Mellon, as you'll see in many cases here, but with the federal government, talking about what is controlled information. And I think we have to make sure everyone has a feel for that and what's involved with controlled information before we go on into greater detail in the CMMC. All right, so I'm going to show a couple of these videos, and then we're going to come back and we'll talk about these a little bit. But I'll go into the first one, and these are on YouTube.
Controlled unclassified information in a controlled environment is paramount to the success of your organization. The CUI program defines a controlled environment as any space or area with adequate physical.
Can you hear it okay? Can everyone hear it okay?
It's a little low.
A little low? Okay, let me.
It seems like it's coming through your speakers instead of
Let me
Zoom out.
stop sharing for a second and make sure I had the blocks checked. So let's see. Yep, you're right. I didn't have them checked. All right.
Or procedural controls to limit unauthorized access to CUI. Let's step inside of this office to see some measures that your organization can take to create a controlled environment. Suppose this is an office of an organization that regularly uses CUI. Is this a controlled environment appropriate for CUI storage and use? Let's take a closer look. There's a conference table in the center of the room. On this table, there are some documents marked as CUI, haphazardly stacked. There are several people in this office, two of whom are deep in conversation about CUI, and the third is a member of the office's cleaning crew, who does not have a lawful government purpose to access this information. For CUI that exists in the physical environment, such as documents, the CUI program requires that inside a controlled environment there is at least one physical barrier to prevent unauthorized access to CUI. Organizations have some flexibility when deciding what constitutes a controlled environment. Suitable environments can be established by using measures that limit or control access to the area. Examples of ways to control access include using standard key locks, utilizing electronic access control devices, or even employing security or administrative personnel. In areas where employees work in close proximity to individuals who may not have the same need for access, or what we call lawful government purpose in the CUI program, it may be necessary to ensure that the workforce has adequate security equipment, such as lockable doors, cabinets, or drawers, to secure CUI when it is not in use. It is also important to establish suitable areas for holding meetings in which CUI will be discussed.
So, as a federal contractor, and if for those of you that have NSA grants, that's going to fall under this category at some point. it really depends on your level of business and the amount of CUI that you handle. So, as an example, if you have like one small contract, might be a uniform provider, right? And 90% of your business has nothing to do with the federal government, but a small percentage does. You still will have to make or take steps to implement some of these things, right? So if it's information that you're going to be discussing about the contract, design aspects of it, things like that, you need a room where those things can be discussed and it can be locked. And then the materials themselves can be in overhead bins, it can be in drawers, but the key thing you can see that they're locked, right? So the information has to be controlled and locked, right? And that's the key that they're getting to in this one. And then they mentioned the whole idea of who needs access to that, right? And that'll be a process that your organization will go through determining, just like any other access control, it starts by determining the need to know, right? And who has a need to know and at what level they need to know and so on, right?
When considering your controlled environment, ask yourself, who works in this space? Who has unescorted access to this space during and after normal business hours? Oftentimes, cleaning or maintenance crews have unrestricted access to areas where CUI is handled or processed, and this presents a risk to that information. Is the area suitable for sensitive discussions? Can anyone, even those who are unauthorized, overhear conversations? Is there a visitor escort policy? Most controlled environments will employ some sort of escort control policy to ensure that there is no unauthorized disclosure of CUI. Very quickly, it becomes apparent that this space is not a control.
All right, so you get the general idea with this one. So I'm going to go back, and you can go back and watch these in full if you want. One of the things that we're going to go into in a little greater detail is the actual marking itself, how and what we use to mark CUI in its different forms. And later on, we'll share with you, we actually have an eMate. So for those who aren't familiar with our eMates, they're interactive activities that demonstrate, a concept, and then, can, in some cases, we can put assessment with it and so on. But it's, sort of like an animation that instead of like a PowerPoint or just a book that illustrates some type of concept or issue. So, all right. So I just wanted to show you these, and you get an idea what the quality of these are. Now, some of these are really dry, but they're sort of important. I would say they're important for your students to see these, to have a better understanding what CUI is, and then how this whole process, there's a whole organization out there now for managing CUI. So the federal government has a person, an archiver that's responsible for setting up the rules and managing the collection of CUI for the federal government. And there's different agencies that have different types of CUI and need for CUI. And we'll spell some of that out, within the course itself. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go down now, and we'll come back to the dashboard later. Christine's going to go through some of this dashboard later with you after we go through some of the basics of the CMMC model itself. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start in module 1. And this is sort of how we laid it out. So here are the kind of questions that we want to answer this morning. What is CMMC? What is FCI? What is CUI? So we've already answered a couple of these already. What's the difference between CUI and FOUO? Who is affected by CMMC? When will CMMC be implemented? What frameworks are referenced? What are the CMMC domains? What are the processes, practices, levels, requirements, roles in new CMMC environment, and then training and certification options. So those are kind of things that we want to cover in this first chapter. Okay, so CMMC was designed basically, it stands for Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, and it was designed basically to improve the maturity of our Department of Defense supply chain, right? We were going from a model which was completely self-reporting and self-managed to one now where you're actually going to have to show the process of going through a actual audit and showing results of the audit, right? So they want a deeper dive, and they actually want proof and evidence that your controls and your capabilities are actually working, right? So of course, your students need to know what controlled unclassified information is. This is sort of an important link right here. The CUI registry provides information on specific categories and subcategories of information that the executive branch protects. So these are all the different agencies and organizations that have CUI. So when we go into marking CUI, one of the things that we need to do is to mark what type of information it is. Which one of these categories does it fall into? And then which subcategory does it fall into, right? So there's a whole system out there for managing unclassified controlled information, right? And it covers all of these areas of the federal government, right, in the executive branch. And I'm going to go ahead and show this one just to give you sort of a feel for what that whole system looks like.
Hello, I'm David Ferriero, Archivist of the United States. As the executive agent for the Controlled Unclassified Information, or CUI program, the National Archives and Records Administration plays a critical role in establishing and maintaining a program for managing unclassified information based on openness, where protection of information is based on law, federal regulation, and government-wide policy, all of which involve public participation in their creation. The CUI program is an important reform of the current patchwork of confusing agency-specific policies that have resulted in inconsistent marking and safeguarding of documents, led to unclear or unnecessarily restrictive dissemination policies, and created impediments to authorized information sharing. As the program is implemented, we can appreciate that the sharing and protecting of information under the CUI program is an art practiced by civil servants in every department and agency and their non-federal partners working on behalf of the American people. Practicing this art sets into motion the creative potential of government operations under the law and requires the mastery of basic concepts and tools standardized across the government, but implemented through the policies and procedures of every federal agency. In support of this program for the entire executive branch, the discussions that follow explain these concepts and tools so fundamental to the entire life cycle of CUI, the definition of CUI and the distinctions between types of information provided in the CUI registry, marking requirements overall for email and for packages and standard mail, controlled environments, both physical and electronic, the principles of access and sharing as they apply to lawful government purpose and limited dissemination, controlled markings, the reproduction of CUI, faxing CUI, reporting incidents, the destruction of CUI, and the acceptable indicators for the decontrol of CUI.
So what are the three drivers? Anyone catch that at the very beginning? So laws, right? So are there actually laws on the books that control this? Yes, there are, right? Regulations. So regulations come out of some of our regulatory bodies, right? And then policies. So those are the three drivers. Not the most exciting speaker in the world, but he does give a good intro to what CUI is all about. And then you'll start to see the complexity of it as we go through this.
CUI, controlled unclassified information, is sensitive information that requires protection under laws, regulations, and government-wide policies. Protection that executive branch agencies have been doing for decades, but on an ad hoc and inconsistent basis.
So if you're going to go and take the exam, you better know those three things, right? You better know that that's what drives how and what we control with CUI, right? So again, laws, right? Regulations and policies are the three drivers.
In the slides that follow, we will discuss the types of information protected under the CUI program. Lawful government purpose is the standard for granting access to CUI. Access to CUI should be granted to individuals performing Any activity, mission, function, operation, or endeavor that the U.S. government authorizes or recognizes as within the scope of its legal authorities or the legal authorities of non-executive branch entities, such as state and local law enforcement.
So could anyone give me an example of that? So what would, as an organization, how would you determine who gets access to specific CUI within your organization? So what do they mean by activities, missions, functions, operations, and endeavors? Anyone give me some examples? They started to give you one there at the beginning, but all right, a lot of legal documents and so on with the Department of Justice are covered by CUI, right? They're not necessarily classified, but they are controlled, right? So potentially an attorney or someone within law enforcement might need access to it to perform their mission or their activities, right? So that could be an investigation, it could be a prosecution, things like that, right? How about like a function or an operation?
What about a network administrator? What about all the documents, for, how they connect, like your ISAs, your, inter security agreements between your third party providers and stuff like that. I mean, those are the people that are going to need it because they, how you set up your VPNs and stuff like that. I mean, that's what I think.
Especially, if it deals with, specific communication requirements and so on within a contract, right?
Yes, sir.
So yeah, that would definitely be an example, especially that would really fall under operations, right?
Yes.
Okay. Any other ones? Anyone else? All right. Well, just to give you an idea of a couple of these, an endeavor, what might an endeavor be?
Well, like, this is Stan. How about something around strategic planning and, trying to reorganize, that sort of stuff? You don't want that getting out into the public.
Exactly. Good example. That's a really good example. Yep. That's a common one that you'll hear with that, right? So any type of planning, strategic planning, logistical planning, things like that, right? And then a function is when you're actually, you're doing something, right? You're performing some type of action. So it could be, how we, control access to, maybe, design documents or something like that, how we encrypt them, how we, control access to those things, right? The person that's performing that function. Okay.
Like a project manager.
As a dynamic standard, this concept focuses on the purposes CUI may serve as a resource in achieving the mission objectives of government operations and projects. Although not required, in principle, CUI should be shared when the contents of CUI will help achieve the goals of a common project or operation. If sharing CUI would obstruct or harm the government purpose, do not share the CUI. The CUI registry, available online, is the catalog of information types under the CUI program. These information types include, for example, privacy, tax, critical infrastructure, law enforcement, proprietary, intelligence, legal, and financial information. Executive branch agencies use the CUI registry to implement the CUI program through their own policies and procedures. For practitioners, the CUI
It's a big difference for those of you, like myself, a little older, probably have worked in, with federal agencies over the years. I'm ex Navy. But in the old days, each of these agencies had their own controlled documents. They didn't call it CUI. They all had their own labels for it, right? And different requirements and so on. So what the federal government has done with regulatory actions is to say, we are going to bring this all under one umbrella and standardize it, because it was a total mess. Some organizations had much more stringent requirements than others. And then when you had interagency and exchange of things, how did you deal with it? How did you market? Things like that. It just added a lot of complexity to the handling and management of this information. So that's where the registry came about and its purpose.
CUI registry provides training modules on topics from marketing to destruction and other resources such as the marketing handbook, CUI cover sheets, and links to access the CUI blog where you can find additional guidance. Before marking CUI, it is important to understand that there are two types of CUI. CUI specified is sensitive information for which laws, regulations, and government-wide policies or authorities call for specific protections. For CUI basic, the authorities do not. CUI specified must be marked in a different way.
Marking is the first step in the proper handling of CUI. Marked CUI informs the user or recipient of the information status. A banner heading must appear at the top of each page of documents containing CUI. Banners may contain up to 3 elements, with each element separated by 2 forward slashes. 1. Control marking. The control marking must always appear in the banner as either the word controlled or CUI at the top of the page. For CUI basic, the control marking is all that is required.
So the idea when we start to mark our documents, this is the standard for marking them, right? So there's 2 categories of information, controlled and uncontrolled. We're basically dealing with uncontrolled in this specific program, right? But then there are all those different subcategories that I showed you the list of earlier, right? If it doesn't fall into any of those, then it's basic, right? And you don't need, additional information. If it is a subcategory, there's a designation for that, for each one of those subcategories that we'll show you, okay?
2. The category marking is only required for CUI specified categories. The category markings found on the CUI registry must follow 2 forward slashes after the control marking and preceded by SP-. 3. Agencies may also apply optional limited dissemination control markings as found on the CUI registry according to agency policies and procedures. Marking CUI in email follows the same principles for marking CUI in other contexts. Banner markings must appear above the email text containing CUI. As a best practice, the subject line may also indicate the email contains CUI. File names for any attachments containing CUI may also include an indicator that alerts the recipient to the presence of CUI. Be sure to include all applicable markings when forwarding or responding to emails that contain CUI.
When shipping CUI,
So you could see that you can actually build these into many email systems nowadays, right? Where you have the tags and they can be generated both in the subject line and as a banner in the email itself, right? We're using more and more of these, right? Have you just noticed that? Like we're using a lot of banners now. Most organizations that, if an email originated from within the organization, if it's classified or unclassified, or there may be warnings about attachments and things like that, right? All those kind of things are now being built into our advanced email systems today, right? Any comments on that? Anyone familiar with those? Anyone working with email administration? That's become a standard part of email today. All right, so they go into not only email, but also regular mail now, right? So now they go into packages.
CUI, you may use interagency mail systems, the United Postal Service, or any commercial delivery service. As a best practice, use in-transit automated tracking to record the progress of your shipment from departure to arrival. And remember, the contents of packages must be appropriately marked, but do not place markings on the outside of packages or envelopes.
CUI must be stored or handled in controlled environments that prevent or detect unauthorized access. A controlled environment is any area or space with adequate physical or procedural control devices to limit or control access to areas where CUI discussion or review of CUI. Be aware of your surroundings and ensure that CUI is adequately protected. In the electronic environment, barriers should exist that limit access to only those with a lawful government purpose. Barriers include dedicated network drives, file folders, or intranet sites. Electronic environments must also prevent or protect CUI from unauthorized access. Notably, under these requirements, existing safeguards that meet the standards for handling classified information are sufficient for protecting CUI. Organizations should establish procedures to ensure that only authorized individuals have access to CUI. These procedures should also remove access when it is no longer required. In short, controlled environments, whether physical or electronic, facilitate access to CUI by authorized users with a lawful government purpose, by safeguarding CUI from access by unauthorized users.
And I'm going to
openness,
skip the.
where protection of information.
But they talk about in here that we also will label electronic devices, right? So whether that's a drive, whether that's a computer itself and so on, but we have labels when information is stored on those devices as well as in emails and in physical documents, right? So if you have USB drives, there's a specific way that we're supposed to label those drives. If you have a system that contains, there's specific labels. And we created a nice little eMate that we'll show you here in a little bit that demonstrates that. So. All right. And then this one goes into just great detail in how you actually create the banners and markings and so on. So if you need one that just goes into that, that's what this video does. And I'm not going to go through that now. And we've already shown you this video. Okay. All right. So how many of you have heard of FOUO, or for official use only, right? I'm sure most of you have heard of that. That was probably the most common classification of documents prior to the development of the CUI archive, right? So what's the difference between them? Well, one's replacing the other. So CUI is really replacing the old for official use only, or FOUO designation. Are there any other differences? Anyone familiar with for official use only? You notice any differences between that and CUI? Okay, so the main difference is it's more centralized and controlled now, right? So that's the main difference. For official use only, there were different categories with all those different agencies and different rules. Now it's under one central management agency, and you were introduced to the person that that the responsibility falls under in his organization, right? So that's the basic thing you need to know with this. A couple other terms that they introduce is CUI is an umbrella term that encompasses all CDI and controlled technical information. So that's that also falls under CUI now. These three markings are given to unclassified content that must be protected in a very specific manner, both within and outside the government information systems. In the past, the government used many different markings to identify this kind of information. Okay, you may have seen some of these, right? So unclassified controlled technical information, sensitive but unclassified. These were all different designations that we had that different organizations used. Now we roll them all up into CUI. Okay, and then here is a typical banner of what it looks like. So again, controlled or uncontrolled, the specific category of CUI, and then limited dissemination controls. Okay, and then we'll give you some examples of these as we go through them. But we gave you some access to resources that you can learn more about the marking system and how it works, even the actual handbook itself. Okay, why do we have CUI? Well, the federal government, when they passed this, they basically identified three reasons why CUI and the CUI program was formulated, and why we've pushed forward this idea of the CMMC, right? So the first that they talk about is this idea of advanced persistent threat. What's an advanced persistent threat? I'm sure most of you teach this in your classes, right? What designates something as being an advanced persistent threat? Anyone? You can, by the way, you can just speak out. You don't have to use chat.
It's continuous and it's advanced. It's sophisticated.
It's sophisticated. Lots of resources, right?
Keeps coming.
Where do these advanced persistent threats normally generate from?
Nation states.
Yeah, mostly nation states, right? Now there are organizations that also deal in some of this, right? But it's mainly nation states. But the key things you need to know is that They have lots of resources. They can get very sophisticated, right? And the whole idea of persistent is it can be over a long period of time, right? And we've seen multiple examples in the news, everything from the theft of military designs to access of examples of individuals and I should say like military personnel information, federal government personnel information, so on, right? So that was one of the reasons why they decided that they needed to act and push forward this idea of a CMMC model and to better control unclassified information. And that's where the two things really originated from. Okay. And just to give you an idea, I like these videos that actually demonstrate like what a persistent threat is and what a zero-day attack is all about. So let's just go ahead and show those. They're commercial, but I think they still do a good job.
An advanced persistent threat is where the attack group identifies a very particular target, and there's something that target's got that the attackers want. It's a very different type of attack. If they try something, it doesn't work. In the other type of attack, it doesn't matter. Somebody else will fall for it. In this type of attack, they're coming after you, so they're just going to try something again. And the advanced bit, that's where it really gets misleading. The attackers are fundamentally lazy. They will try something easy, and if that works, great, job's done. The advanced bit really comes in where you're a hardened target. You've already put in place enough measures that the first few things they try don't work. They will just keep trying more and more sophisticated techniques until they eventually find something that works. If they're up against a deadline, they'll keep trying rapidly. You could be dealing with a piece of malware coming into your estate that has only existed for the last 10 minutes. So there is no way that any of your existing technologies that are just taking in kind of block lists of virus signatures, none of those are going to be any use at all against that kind of attack.
That gives you the general idea, and I like this other video because it's a good one for students. I think it grabs our attention. So I'm going to show you this one if you haven't seen this one. And this goes into the whole idea of using the 0-day.
You've taken great care to secure your network. But even with responsible and sustained investments in your defenses, you're still at risk. Attackers can bypass your security through an uncharted software vulnerability, a loophole revealed only by the persistent probing of a determined hacker. This is how a network is breached. This is how valuable data is stolen. This is 0-day. A 0-day is a software vulnerability that is previously unknown and unpatched, and therefore can be exploited by a threat actor to gain entry to a target network. A hacker finds a 0-day through hours, weeks, or months of painstaking effort. He scours through lines of code, probing applications and operating systems to find some weakness, some flaw. He methodically barrages the target application with an array of reverse engineering tools and techniques, forcing the software to reveal a small crack in the defenses that provides him a way to secretly execute code. With this vulnerability in hand, the hacker has a choice. Help the software vendor by providing them information about the vulnerability, or sell it to a broker, a black market vendor of 0-day exploits. The broker compiles an inventory of 0-days to build his reputation on the dark net with one goal: selling his exploits at the highest price. The broker lists these 0-days on secret forums. He acts as a matchmaker between exploit and attacker. The attacker needs an exploit that augments their existing tools and techniques. They use reconnaissance data to select the 0-day exploit that is most likely to compromise their target. Because 0-day exploits are previously unknown, they provide an element of surprise. The attacker incorporates the 0-day exploit into their customized attack, and once the perfect storm of program, process, and payload is concocted, the attack is launched. In a network protected by FireEye, NX0.
All right, we don't need to know about fire. All right. But I think these are good visual ways to instruct and have students have a better understanding of the threat. So the next thing we need to get into is part of the CMMC model is also dealing with federal contract information. So it's CUI and federal contract information. That's what the CMMC basically is all about. It's protecting those two types of information, right? So does everyone know what federal contract information is? Anyone dealt with companies that went after federal contracts? So the contracts can provide lots of information, right? And some of that information can be rather sensitive, right? Anyone give me an example? So how might federal contract information be of value to someone?
Either a competitor or an enemy working on an airplane.
Right, because an enemy now knows what types of resources you're pursuing, right? What other kind of things can be in a federal contract information? Well, a lot of specifications can be in there, right? Maybe the scope of the types of design information that's going to be required. Now, some of them other things might be covered under classified information, but that's the whole idea behind this, right? If you can pick away at unclassified information, you can start to build a picture of what type of classified information you may want to target, or you may be able to devise out of it, right? So those are the two major areas that we're dealing with when we're talking about the CMMC model, is protecting CUI and protecting FCI, or federal contract information. And at the lowest level of the model, when we start to get into the framework of the model now, it starts with this whole thing of FCI, right? FCI is the basis of it, right? So protecting that information of the contracts that you're applying for. And you can see why they're saying you need to go through this and be certified before you can apply for a contract, right? Because what would be the purpose of doing it if you were giving someone the contract information first, right? So you get sort of the idea behind this, right? The idea is that, to receive this contract information and process and so on, you'll have to be eligible, and the CMMC is what will be used to determine eligibility. Okay. All right. And then they just go into some specific information about it. So the acronym FCI refers to Federal Safeguard Contract Information. The requirement covers contract information system, means an information system that is owned and operated by the contractor that stores, processes, stores, and transmit federal contract information. And you need to do that, right? You have multiple offices, right? You might have logistics where you need to plan for some of these things and so on. So you need to protect that information if you're going to be disseminating it within and without your organization. And the other thing to understand is that, this involves the federal government as the contractor, the first contractor, and then potentially subcontractors as well, right? So the point is that the subcontractors are covered by CMMC as well in the protection of federal contract information. Okay. All right. And then safeguarding means measures or controls that are prescribed to protect information systems, safeguarding requirements and procedures. The contractor shall apply the following basic safeguard requirements and procedures to protect covered contract information. And then they start to list through all of these. But these are basically covered in level 1 of the CMMC model when we go into the CMMC model. But these are the key things that they're trying to do. And I'm not going to go through and read all of these, but these are the types of things. If you're going to go and take the exam, you would need to know these. You probably have to, put these to memory. So, okay. When we talk about the CMMC model itself, the CMMC model is based on the CIA triad. All these have taught that. I mean, the only thing I'm going to show you here is that we do have a nice tool for you. I don't know how many of you have seen the e-mates that we've done on CIA triad. If you have not, let me just show it to you real quick. So this is the eMate that we developed to teach the McCumber Cube, which is a way of illustrating the CIA model in a three-dimensional format, right? So I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with some of this, but when we talk about the principles of cybersecurity, there are basically three principles that we would talk about, right? And those would be confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These are the types of things that we're trying to protect with our information security systems and our processes, right? And I think we all know what confidentiality is, what integrity is, and availability, right? When we talk about those, though, it's important. And John McCumber came up with this approach of looking at it by the different states of data. So we need to be concerned about the three states, or the three principles of cybersecurity when we're processing data, when we're storing data, and when we're transmitting data. So we have an intersection between the three states of data and the three principles of cybersecurity, right? And then they introduced the idea that we have countermeasures that we can use in implementing these, right? So they can be procedurals and policies. They can be technological countermeasures, right? Or they can be the education and awareness of our workforce, right? And then the whole idea is that we have an intersection of all of these, right? So, we might want an example of protecting confidentiality of stored material, and we want a technology, right? So what this eMate lets students do is to go through and get examples of one. So if we click on this, it shows us the intersection between the three of these might be like a USB drive and a fingerprint reader, right? Or we might be trying to protect the integrity of information using policies and procedures in the stored state, or let's say the transmitted state of confidential information. So it gives you an example. So a guideline that outlines data transmission mechanisms to ensure data is not modified during transmission, right? But you can go through and get an example of each one of these, right? So it sort of brings to life the idea of the McCumber Cube and intersecting these three different ideas, right? The principles, the states of data, and the types of countermeasures that we can implement. All right. And by the way, we also have a challenge that goes along with this. In fact, did we put it in here? Let's see if we have the challenge in here. All right. So it's not in here, but if you go to our website I'm going to go to this one. I know it's because it's easier to go to, but there's others we can go to. But our CASIA website, by the way, these are all going to be moved over to a website with the domain name myemates.gov, or not gov, .org, .net, and what's the other one, Christine? Do you know what's the third one? Is it .com? Yes, it's .com.
Or, yeah, .com. It is.
Yeah. Under resources, though, you'll see eMate interactives. Takes a second to pull them up. And if we were to go down to the McCumber Cube challenge, it's right here. And here we now test the students with what we just demonstrated to them. So now we give you an example. We want to know, where does this intersect? Now, the one thing with this one, we have gotten some feedback because some of this can be not an exact answer, right? It could be, but anyhow, if you go into these, we give examples. So a code that represents your password characters with asterisks when you're logging in with your password. We're trying to protect the confidentiality of the password, right? It's a technological, we're in the process of logging in, and it's a technological solution, right? But it keeps a rolling score, and it just gives them one after another, things that they can try to identify those and link them back to the aspects of the McCumber Cube. Okay, so it's just something you might want to use when introducing those concepts. Has anyone used these yet? Any feedback?
John, this is Stan. I have used them in my courses. I pepper them in from time to time because they're short and sweet. And it's just another way of bringing, another angle towards the topic.
Yep. Thanks. All right. And we just introduced all of these, so I can skip this. Within these, we talked about the states of data. When we talk about the protection of data, it's important for students to understand that form of data can come in many different forms, right? It can be paper documents, it can be electronic data. When we talk about electronic data, we have all kinds of different encodes and ways that we encode data, right? How many different code types are out there today? Anyone ever go to the website and see the list of official recognized codes that we can build into our applications now? There's hundreds of them, right? I mean, just for audio files, we have dozens of different formats for audio files. Picture files, again, dozens of different formats and so on. And all of these things could fall under CUI. Okay. CUI basically goes down to when we're talking about maturity is measured by your capabilities, right? So, as you become more mature at something, you have greater capabilities, right? And them capabilities can basically be tracked to controls, right? Or control types. And we have another eMate here that basically introduces students to the whole ideas of controls and the different types of functions for security controls, and then the different categories, right? And if you go to this eMate, it sort of lays that one out. So if you haven't used this one, this is what it looks like. So it talks about the categories. We have administrative controls. We have technical controls. And then we have physical controls. All right. And then the functions of controls can fall under these different categories. Now, the one thing about controls, they can be subjective, right? When we talk about their functional category, how is it? Why would we say it's subjective? Anyone?
Just your point of view, your opinion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean,
what you're doing.
Yeah, you might, one person might think that this is more detective than deterrent, right? Or so on. Because, different controls can be classified by more than one function, right? So, that's a good example might be like a security guard. What would a security guard be? Would they be preventative, detective? It could be both, right? A security guard could prevent something from happening, but they could also detect something happening, right?
Even
They could
correct.
also serve as a deterrent, right? So there are different types of controls that can fall under more than one category. But the point is getting students to think about these different types of controls, right? We'll have those, lengthy discussions in our classes, and I want them to dig in and say, well, no, I think this is more, preventative than detective and so on. It really depends on the situation, sort of how you're implementing the controls and so on. But I think we could all agree that there are many different types of controls that could fall under more than one category, right? Even when we talk about more than one functional purpose, right? All right, anyone deal with that in class when talking about controls? Okay. And then, we get to controls and compliance. Compliance is really the measure of our controls, right? When we talk about financial compliance, it's, we're not looking for, individual mistakes. We're looking for controls that would identify those mistakes, right? Or that would create those mistakes. Same thing here, right? So we're looking at the implementation of controls and the effectiveness of controls, right? In some cases, controls may need to be enhanced or replaced, right? And that's what compliance is all about, are the controls performing the function that we're expecting them to perform, right? Are they, so that's what that's all about. But if you go through these, we give examples of each of these in here. And again, we have people constantly get back and say, well, I think this is, falls under this. And we're not going to argue about it because you're probably right in different circumstances, but we took a crack at, categorizing some of these in the most common applications of them. Okay, so that's the one on controls. Okay, we just give you some examples here. And then here's that CUI eMate that we talked about earlier. So I think this is for students that have never dealt with marking systems. This gives them a really good foundational understanding of marking systems. So if we go into this one, okay, it talks about the different categories. These are different categories of unclassified, controlled unclassified information programs that are out there today, right? Though that's the special part, right? So if it's basic, it doesn't necessarily fall into one of these, but these are all the special purpose ones, right? Okay, we give some examples. And then these are all the different categories. So critical infrastructure, defense, so on. You can go through each one of these. I'm not going to do that, but it spells out what each one of these are. If you're going to go for the basic auditor practitioner, you will need to know these. So I will just tell you, this will be a good eMate for practicing for that exam. Okay. Go through all of them. And then we go into how different types of media and systems are marked. So we go into great detail, paper markings and how you build them. Okay. So here we talk about whether it's controlled or uncontrolled, the category, what all the different categories were, and then examples of limited dissemination. So here, when we talk about limited dissemination, it could be no foreign dissemination, federal employees only, federal employees and contractors. You get the idea, but we're controlling who should be given access to this information, right? And then here are banners and document markings. All right, email, and they went through that in the video. Electronic storage. So we actually have stickers that go onto the device itself. And then systems. And again, there are stickers that would go on to the actual drive or system itself. Okay, so that's the example of the CUI eMate. Okay. And I'm going to skip this one. Okay. So what is the CMMC? We'll go through this pretty quickly. It stands for, again, the cybersecurity maturity model. Are there other maturity models out there? Is this the first time they've ever created this idea of a maturity model? Anyone? No. What's another common example you'd probably know in computer science? Anyone familiar with the other big maturity model?
The CMM?
Yeah, right. For what? What do we use it for? Anyone?
I recall the Orange Book. It was a classification system, but I'm missing probably something on that.
Okay, and we also have a maturity model for program development, right? For programmers and building secure coding, right? And there's controls and so on that we have a maturity model in that area as well. And there's other areas that it doesn't have to be dealing with just cybersecurity. But the idea is that we are taking a community and trying to improve something within that community, right? In this case, it's the DoD supply chain, right? And that's what we're trying to do with it, right? So CMMC will encompass a 3-level maturity model. The intent is to incorporate CMMC into the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, or what is called DFARS, and use it as a requirement for contract award. That's the idea, right? That's where we're going to move to. To be eligible for contracts in the future, you will have to pass certain levels of the CMMC through an audit, right? And that can be a self administered audit or one that it's administered by the Department of Defense auditors themselves, right? All right. It was created by the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment for protecting CUI. It will apply to defense industry-based supply chain, or what we call DIB. Here are 3 good reasons why. We've already talked about some of this, but I'm sorry, here are 3 really good resources to learn more about it. So you can go to the authoritative link, you can go to the accreditation board, and you can also look at Carnegie Mellon's website. They had a lot to do with helping design it, right? The purpose, and I think we've already talked about the purpose. Again, it's to protect federal contact information and CUI. This right here is the dashboard that we're going to be looking at. So it's broken into domains and levels. So AC would be access control and so on. And each one of these domains has processes and capabilities that an organization has to prove that they have effective processes and capabilities within each of these areas, right? And the more you have, the higher level it is. Okay, the current version 2, we started off with a 5-level model, right? And we've now moved to, they've shrunk it down to a 3-level model. Okay, so just so you know, one of the main differences between the 2. Okay, and in the first iteration, I think they tried to do everything for everyone. So they used the NIST 800-171 standard in their domains as the basis for this, but then they added information from 2 other sources. But, the federal government came back and said, not everyone necessarily has to abide by those. So they, when coming back to the version 2, they limit it now just to the NIST 800-171 framework. Okay, so that's one of the changes, is that those outside practices have been eliminated. Okay, and we've gone from a 3-level model to a 2-level model. Okay, who's affected by it? Well, definitely the contractors would be, right? Federal agencies are. And then there's a accreditation board that has been established. And the idea of the accreditation board is to certify the marketplace. So it'll certify the auditors, and it will certify trainers and publishers in the area, right? And practitioners. So, and you probably should go to the CMMC accreditation board to take a look at the website itself. They sort of break down what the different accreditations are, what the costs are that are involved, and so on. It's pretty costly though. I mean, for us to become a trainer, just to apply is $5,000, plus the individual that's going to be the trainer has to apply. And then you have to go through a review process, and then at some point take an exam for your knowledge level and so on. Okay. And this is what the new structure looks like. So in level 1, in version 1, it was a 5-level model, right? It was very basic, basic hygiene and performance. All you're basically to do, you had to perform practices. You didn't have to measure them or document them or any of those things, just perform them. Well, controls aren't very good unless you're actually examining the results of those controls, right? So level 2 is a transitionary level in the previous model. So combining level 1 and 2 into one wasn't really a big change, because they really never intended to use a level 2 designation. Level 2 is all about documenting your practices, what you're performing, right? Well, that now is level 1, and they call that foundational, right? Level 3 was you're managing those controls, and they call this good cyber hygiene. In level 2 now, with version 2, they call that advanced. And then level 3 is where you're doing regular reviews and optimizing your practices, right? It was called proactive, then advanced and progressive. Now they just call it expert, but level 4 and 5 now have been combined into level 3. Most organizations only have to certify at level 2, right, in order to qualify for contracts. Now, level 3 is going to be required for special types of contracts and special types of handling of CUI and federal contract that require special handling. All right. So the point is that most organizations, probably 80% of them, will only need to qualify up to level 2. And then the rest of them will have to be level 3. Okay. Because when you think about, federal DoD contractors, they can supply everything from pencils to uniforms to fighter jets, right? Well, the pencils and uniforms might not need the same level as fighter jets and so on, right? So, so that's why, a great majority are only going to fall under level 2. Okay. And then this is sort of a breakdown of what level 1 looked like early on. There was 17 practices in level 1. Well, there's still 17 practices. And you'll have to go through an annual self-audit of those practices and document them, right? So there is a documentation requirement. Okay. The 72 with the 2 mature and none in level 2, that now gets built into the level 2 requirements. Okay, so level 2 goes up to 110 practices. It doesn't add up, right? It used to be 130. Well, they took out 20 of them that did not align to the 800.171. Okay. Now for this one, you need a triannual third-party assessment for critical national security information and an annual self-assessment for selective programs. So the requirements are a little higher. And again, more organizations are going to fall under that category, right? And then the highest level is the level 3, which is the expert level. Well, I mistakenly told you the wrong thing previously. Level 3 is level 3 here, level 2, level 1. So yeah. Okay. All right. And these are the new terms that they use in defining these. So it's foundational, advanced, expert, rather than basic hygiene, intermediate hygiene, good hygiene, advanced, proactive. Okay. And this is sort of the process that you go through, and we have an email out here that shows this. I'm not going to go through this one now. We're sort of running out of time here, so I want to go back. All right. Why can't I? I must have accidentally closed my page. Okay, so I want to pick it up with the audit process itself. Okay, when we talk about an audit, it's just like, most other audits, right? Like a lot of the auditing has come from our financial industries and so on, right? And there are certain practices in doing audits, right? But the key thing you need to know with these audits is that it consists of 3 types of evidence that we're going to want, and that would be documentation, right? So you're going to document things. So it could be log files, it could be signature files when someone comes into a restricted area. It could be, it could even be like you videotape, something, right? The next type is observation. So you have this system there to protect something. Well, the auditor is going to come in and watch that when the system is activated, that it does what it's supposed to do. And they observe that the countermeasure is effective in doing what it's designed to do, right? That's observation. So you have documentation, observation. And then the third is interviews, right? Where you're going to go in and you're going to talk to people to make sure they understand their roles and their responsibilities. And, if they're using tools and things like that, that they're using the appropriate tools. Okay. And then the roles, they basically break roles into 4 roles. Those of the practitioner, which is preparing an organization for an audit, the assessors, which are the auditors themselves, trainers, and then education, which is the materials that you would use for training. And each of these now, if you go to the website, have designations, and they're changing this. This is one thing that will be changed. And today I expect to see some additional changes to these different requirements for the different designations. Okay. These were some of the older timelines. I can get rid of these now, but these are the groups that they're going to have: registered practitioners, certified assessors, instructors, and then they have their own staff designations within the AB itself. Okay. They talk about the services that the accreditation body will provide. So it's training, infrastructure, accreditation, credentialing, and assessment operations. So the whole idea, they're going to help the whole community through this process. And basically the idea is they're going to promote the use of only accredited trainers and auditors and so on. So you can't have an audit done by some outside independent group. They have to hold the actual auditing credential, right? So that's the process of the accreditation body itself. Okay. And they just identify some of the roles that would fall under these, that we need these individuals to be certified, and what their roles would be. Again, I don't want to go through all of it. And then the whole process of conducting a readiness assessment and gap analysis. So you take the framework with the processes, and we'll show you a tool that you can use to do this next. And you identify what you are currently doing and where you need to get to with a gap analysis. And we'll show you the tool here next. Okay. And this is just another eMate that shows, that multiple steps, defense in depth, the whole concept of defense in depth, that you can take more than one approach to implementing controls and practices that are going to protect your systems. And here's a better example of controls in depth. This one's a little above and beyond what you might need for protecting CUI and FCI, but it gives you an idea what that's about. All right. And I think that's it for this one. So we're going to take a break at this point.
I think we'll start. So what I'm going to show you is the CMMC dashboard made by the Heartland group that John talked about. And what it is, it's a web application that could be housed in the cloud or on site that provides organizations with a way to create either a foundation of their cyber hygiene and cyber posture, and then to maintain it and then continually improve upon it. So it's like you create a baseline through your audit using this dashboard, and then you continue your efforts to ensure that you are meeting the objectives of whatever government or federal regulations or internal regulations that you have set for yourself. So let me share my screen and then we'll go on. Okay. So this is what the dashboard looks like. Again, it's just one way that provides an, oh, do you have a question, Joe?
Yes, ma'am. I assume that you said that this would be applied to your self audit for level 1. So that's so this would be used for that as well.
Mm-hmm. So
Okay.
you can use it for internal, and the cool thing about this tool is that you can export the data to give to the external auditors should you have the external audit too.
Okay.
So it's a really cool way to collect all the artifacts necessary, and then see what practices, or like John said, how you are in the cyber hygiene and the maturity model that's required of your company, whether you be a prime or a sub contractor. Okay. So
and then I just have one other question, because we use CSET a lot because we don't do a lot of the classified. Are you familiar with the CSET auditing tool?
Not as familiar as I am with the Heartland group, but if you have any information that would be beneficial to the group, please, any information that you have would be awesome to share.
Yeah, I mean, and they're similar. I'm sure the tools are very similar.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I didn't know. I figured that you're more, supply chain, and then, CSET's going to be more, control based, high level marks and stuff like that. But anyway, okay. Thank you. I just wanted to see how I could merge the two. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Joe. So this is the dashboard. If you go to cybersecure dashboard, and I'll throw this in the chat. put that right here. So you can see if you can get started. If you're just curious about what it looks like, there's a 14-day trial period that you can use. It's a fully functional trial. Otherwise, for individual businesses, it's $1,800 annually. And then for supply chain license, you can contact them. But as John mentioned, as educators, they're willing to provide us with access to it so that we can take our students through how an audit is conducted. But you'll see one thing when you create the account, and then I'll get into the account so you can see it, is that you need multi-factor authentication. So you need like Google Authy or something like that to, it's kind of practice what you preach kind of thing, right? So here's the dashboard, and let me go back to so you'll see mine's still expired. You'll see that, as John mentioned too, that there's still, there's going to be 5 maturity levels because of the CMMC 1, but they're currently undergoing changes and revisioning so that it's for 2.0. But you'll see they have a dashboard. So right when I log in, you'll see they have a status letting me know, wow, there's a lot that I need to work on. But it's one quick way to gauge where your organization is. This is probably likely if you're just starting out on an audit. Then you have the plan of action and milestone tasks. So if you're building your audit and, say for instance, you come up with a fictitious company for your students to work on, you can give them artifacts and they can build the audit and learn how to actually go through it. And the beauty of this tool is that it puts it in layman terms too. So people that are not highly technical can go through it and ask informed questions because it is in plain English. So it's really nice for the auditor, for non-technical, and for the technical. You'll see we have the standards for the CMMC, but they do have multiple versions of standards. Should you be a manufacturing standard, or if you want to do 800, 171, you can change that. And you'll see the different domains and the different practices underneath that. And then documentation. The cool thing too is that you can make your students accounts and then they can start building too and assigning tasks to them. So this is just the entry screen that you'll see. Below that, you'll see the different types of dashboards you can employ. So you can see they have the DoD cybersecurity maturity model, which we're working at. They have the NIST 800, 171. Again, they're updating this. So hopefully soon we'll see the 2.0. They have the cybersecurity framework, or the CSF. So if you're just interested in making sure that your company has a good cyber posture and hygiene, this is one way to do that, to make sure that you have that baseline. The manufacturing profile, which is pretty cool, and then the remote bridges. But it's easy to build one and then see how you compare to another, which is really a nice tool. And if you go, let me go back. If I go to that DoD, the really cool thing here, and you'll be able probably to do this when they contract to 3 maturity levels, is go to, in the upper left-hand corner, it tells you what practices are necessary based on the maturity level you're trying to achieve. And what's really cool is that you can dig into each of these individually. So for access control, I can click on AC 1.001. And it tells me is from the, now they're doing the revisions to 800, 171 revision 2, but you'll see the discussion from the source. They're saying where this practice was sourced from, any clarification for CMMC applicability, and then they give you examples. So someone that's not technical, that just wants to understand it, say for instance, someone in your auditing office that might want to do the interviews because they're not technical, but they know enough, they can get into here and to the screen and start reading about it and understanding what's needed in order to meet this this practice. And for further information, they have the different references listed as well. Now, those are the practices to capture the controls. On the right-hand side, you can actually go in and look at to declare the status, whether it's been implemented, not implemented, started, not started. You can look at different questions. So this is something that you can use as an auditor. Does the company use passwords? Hopefully, right? So, or is there some kind of alternative like a biometrics? But you can document what they do as you go through these questions. Does the company have an authentication mechanism? So they start to build your policies and your processes from your company inside this audit. And at a later date, you'll be able to, or anyway, anytime you want, be able to export your answers and give that to an auditor, or to improve upon the practices that your company currently employs. Then they have resources such as where to look, who to talk to, what do you perform tests on to see whether or not your company is doing the practice that they say they're doing. Again, this is like really guiding you through the audit, internally or externally. You can add history information. So as you work on this practice, you can add additional information that becomes like part of that archive. Then they have tasks. So if you need to document something, you need to assign a task to someone, you can do that here. The severity, assignee, whether it's reoccurring, when it's due, and then the final status. And then someone's, probably the administrator, not just a user, will change the status from completed or approved. And then you can use your artifacts. So when you're building a repository of artifacts that strengthen your practice or document your practice, you can do this here. So the really nice thing is that you can dig really deep into each of these practices, document them, assign tasks if they're not documented or they need to be followed up on, and then create almost like I was going to say a per chart, but you create your own plan of action, and it tells you, well, it helps keep track of what you need to do when. Again, while you're building that, you can add these tasks. So to add a task, and you can export the tasks as well. If I add a task assigned to something, I can't do it now because I have a trial version, but I can say a test. I can assign a severity code, a status. What happens if it's not a delinquent action, if partially changed to not implemented? So what happens if it's not done when it should be? And then a description of the task along with any kind of documentation that I need. You can add a copy and paste a Word document right into it. And then have an interim solution. And then you'll see if anyone is going to manage this task and approve it eventually.
So you can see how this could be used to do your self-audit, right? So, like if you looked at AC1, limit information system access to authorized users. You could basically go in here and, first of all, you could have someone assigned to, testing out the system and documenting the system. So again, remember, it's about CUI and FCI, right? So you'd identify, okay, how are we handling CUI? Are we centrally managing, standardizing that process? You document that, right? Then you document the systems that you're doing that with, right? And then you might have a task in there where you're educating everyone, right? Because they may be interviewed. Someone's going to come in and ask you, where's CUI, located? How is it controlled? Where do you have meetings when discussing CUI? Things like that, right? So it could be everything from your documentation, your observation of your systems and results of your system test to your actual preparing people for interviews. But this is a perfect tool, wouldn't it be, for preparing your organization for an internal audit, right? You're a self-audit.
Oh, definitely. We always joke it would be nice for accreditation purposes too, for your educational
for schools. Yeah. Just so you know what the three changes. Oh, someone's breaking up there. You trying to say that,
Jonathan?
Yeah. Can you have multiple projects going on at the same time? If I wanted, 4 different groups of students working on.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Yeah, you can. What I was going to say though is that the main changes to this are going to be they dropped 3 domains. So if you go back to the domains thing, I can show them which ones. So and those are domains that were made up primarily of non NIST 800-171. So they dropped asset management, they dropped recovery, and they dropped situational awareness. Okay. So those are the 3 that no longer exist. So the domains are going to look pretty much the same. Now, again, they collapse 5 levels into 3. So that levels up at the top where you have 5, that's what they're working on now. So they've got all the new ones in there. So when you click on 1, it will show you just what you need for 1. When you click on 2, it'll show you what you need for 2. And when you get to 3, it's all of, basically all of them, whatever. So but that's one of the major changes in the, in the process itself. The part I really hate though is that they renumbered all of these. So I had to go through all our PowerPoints and all our stuff because they renumbered all of them. So unfortunately, they're the same. They're the same practices, but they renumbered them all. Okay. And I guess they had to based on the restructuring that they did. So, but the key thing is the new 2.0 is going to be a little easier for most organizations. The biggest complaint they had was like, small companies are never going to be able to do this, right? Well, they've made this, something that a small company could do, but it's going to be required. You got to protect those types of information. So, okay. So unfortunately we're a little behind because of I went over a little bit. So, but anyone have any questions on the, we're going to come back to everyone that's taken this class. And when the new one comes out, we're going to offer a free class out there that if you take it, they will give you a free license to use this in your class. So we're sort of waiting for them to complete this. And then it's probably this summer sometime, we'll come back and be able to offer that class, to get you access to this tool for free. Okay. Sorry, Christine, to jump in on it, but.
Oh, no, I appreciate it. It's better to be informed, and especially with the contraction to the 3 maturity levels. So this is the nice dashboard. Let me get him. Okay, Lamar. So this is the task. So you can identify the tasks, and it becomes a calendar too. So if you want to monitor where the tasks are and whether they're completed, as you build out your audit, you'll see more populated under this screen. The one thing I really like is that in case you're a new company or you don't have policies in place, they do have templates that you can use to kind of base your new your company's policy on, and then formalize that, and then include that in the repository. The folder here just represents what files and artifacts are available for an external auditor or an internal auditor, for that matter, to document a verified process or policy. It could be an interview. Any of those things can be stored in the repository here. On the left-hand side, you'll see you can export a report, which is really cool based on what report measure you're looking for. So I can say I want to do the CMMC, and it will download a report for me. And I'll share that when it loads. It just takes a minute, but what it is doing is collecting all the information that you've entered into this dashboard, and it will export in a nice report. So your students have something too. So if you're to export this and say, okay, students, oh, here we go. Let's see what that looks like. Okay. Okay, it's just on a different screen. I have like 3 huge screens, so but you'll see here they generate an assessment report based on a particular focus. So they give you an executive summary, where you are, what's good, what's bad, what needs some work. So the yellow is kind of like some additional work is necessary, green is good to go, and red, I have a lot to work to do according to my dashboard. But then it goes through this and tells you whether it's required, what the status is, and it gives you a brief description of each practice. So when they shifted the numbers, you can imagine how much work was involved in trying to accommodate that new numbering system. So you have this dashboard snapshot. Below that, another thing that I like that you can see are the different standard bodies, or their links to those versions. So one thing that I before the 2.0 came out, and I'm hoping that they come out with a new one, but if you really want to know more about the CMMC and get deeper into it, the appendices V102 has a lot of great information for your students. So the main is great, talks about the different maturities, and hopefully they'll come out with a new one when everything's revised. But these are really nice resources. And then you have just notifications. But as a user, I want to say, for my account, you can have different people on your account. You can add people to your account. I just have limited access right now because my trial expired, so I don't have a fully functional account right now. I'm waiting for the 3.0. Does anyone have any questions about this dashboard? I think one of the most important things that this dashboard does is create an awareness of cybersecurity throughout your company, or even for your students if we're using it as a use case in your classes. It also helps with long-term compliance. It creates a baseline and a continuous improvement effort to ensure that you have a good cyber hygiene and posture. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Johnny asked me to do a presentation on how to, well, the next few things I'll do is how to prepare for a security audit, some internal interviews, and then I'll talk about the domains for awareness and training and personnel security. So I won't be too long, as I know we're at during everyone's, well, if you're central, we're kind of lunchtime. So this is, you'll see some of the things that the new version that's going to be coming out on the right-hand side of the screen. So hopefully that will be something of interest to you. I think it's a really cool tool. Again, it really helps people with non-technical backgrounds understand what information is needed, who needs to be interviewed or talked to, and where to look for some of the content. One thing John talked about is having a good interview and having people ready to do an audit. So when you have external people coming in for audit, it kind of brings about negative connotations, and people are automatically nervous that's either going to make them look bad or cause extra work or cause punitive actions. So one thing we need to do is prepare the organization and the employees for the security audit and provide tips for whoever's doing the internal audit and the employees that are going to be the interviewees, what type of questions to expect, what kind of documentation will be necessary. And as John mentioned, it's all about protecting and controlling access to the CUI and making sure that that's protected. Another thing, security audits are important because it measures how well the security performance is of the company is against a set of criteria. So when we do our interviews, it can identify any security problems and gaps. It can determine whether the practices comply with your internal policies or any type of external regulatory requirements, and determine whether our security or the security training at the company is adequate. And routine audits are really helpful to ensure that employees stick to the security practices. And it also, again, reminds people of why we have them in place. Okay, so again, just making sure the one thing I like to do is just tell people audits aren't bad, they're fact-finding, not fault-finding missions. And again, it's just one way to verify that our company or our education or what organization is, we're verifying conformity to their practices, and we're evaluating whether those practices are effective and are there any areas for improvement. And again, the audits can uncover some issues and with processes that can be used to reduce any risk, and we can address them properly. So what we're going to do today is just talk about goals of an interview, who are we going to target for the interviews, construct interviews, how to prep for them, conduct them, and evaluate them. If anyone ever has anything to add, if you've done an interview, I always say collective intelligence is the best. We're a community of learners and practitioners, so it's good to share with one another. So there's no one that's the authority. So if you have anything that you'd like to throw in, at any time, please let me know, or just speak up. That's really cool. Interviews are super important because they look beyond what the practices and policies that are documented are. They can uncover some processes that might be drastically different than what a company says they're doing. And they could also document processes that are being done that are not documented. So it's good to take stock of what your company's doing and then ensure that they're documented. And when you're interviewing, it's one way to really uncover someone's real duties. And it's also another way to ensure that people, your employees, are well aware of what their responsibilities are and to determine whether or not the processes that they're using are compliant and conforming with what your company says they do. And again, I always say and you're going to hear me say it a couple times, these are going to be focused on fact finding, not fault finding. We're not going to do a, aha, I got you. It's more like how your processes are and how can we make these better? Are there any deficiencies or gaps that need to be addressed? And interviews are way beyond just a simple survey or form or written documentation. They're designed to get the attitudes, behaviors, or preferences, feelings, and attitudes, opinions, and knowledge of the person that you're interviewing. Again, you can't get all that information just out of a survey or form. And when we think about what the goals of an interview are, we want to think like an auditor. So if you're doing an internal audit, you're going to designate someone to do this and interview your employees. And then you're going to look at the requirements for each of the domains that you're going to address for the CMMC and ask appropriate questions for that domain. So you want to prepare your employees for any external interviews that they'll be required to attend. You know, again, it conjures up feelings of pressure or stress or nervousness. So you want to do this internally, routinely, maybe quarterly or once a year at least, so that the people that will get tapped on the shoulder to do the external audit will be used to doing one and being able to answer the questions adequately and just be able to provide the documentation as well. So before you even get to the goals of the interview, you want to make sure that you review the company, what they do, what are their security processes and controls, and because if you don't have any idea about those, how are you going to come up with good interview questions and determine who needs to be interviewed? So having an understanding of the processes that are documented and the identified controls is necessary. So what do you want to study and or assess? What are you trying to better explain or explore? What information do you need to document the policy, practice, or process? And what linkages or thoughts or explanations do you want to explore or document? So those are a couple of things that you need to do. You also need to target people to interview. So you need to determine who would be best able to help you achieve the goals of the interview and study. You want to stay away from people that are just newly hired. And I know it's sometimes hard to get people that are there and established in the company because they're needed, but they're the people that understand the processes and the policies. So if someone's newly hired, they're probably not going to get you're not going to get a lot of good information from them. And then like what types of qualifications does the subject have to make them a good subject to interview? Or where are they in the level of the organization? So normally the higher the level, the less detail you're going to collect. The more detailed information is going to come from the technician or the people actually doing the work, where you're going to get those greater details. And what kind of information do you collect from the subjects? So now when we're looking at interview questions, they can be developed through a process or procedure or documentation. Does the company have past audit experience, or can we use their past data reviews to see whether or not there have been improvements made? If it's the first time, looking through their processes and documentation can help set the stage for what interview questions you're going to ask. One thing that you need to also do is have questions that are open-ended, because you want to create a conversation. You don't want a yes, no answer, because that doesn't give you much. You want to ask how things are done rather than why. Avoid any kind of leading questions or questions that can be either ambiguous or confusing. And you want to frame the question so that you communicate what you want to know to the interviewee, and then perhaps a logical flow of questions. Let's see. And then you're going to conduct the interview. If you, again, has anyone done an interview at all, or been an interviewee? Okay. Oh, you go. Okay. Thanks, Joe. So like sometimes it's nerve-wracking when my friends get the ISO come around, they come to their company, everyone's running around making sure that everything's done. So you want to make sure people feel at ease when they do come. When you do your internal interview, you want to identify someone maybe outside their department so they can feel what it's like to be interviewed by an external. And have them introduce themselves and explain the goal of the interview. So what are you trying to find? What are you trying to achieve? You're going to let the interviewee know that you're going to take notes so they don't feel like you're giving them like bad marks. It's just you're looking for some common, that you're going to be taking notes, and you might have some follow-up questions, and you might email them later asking for documentation. You're going to start the interview by getting to know them a little bit, by building a rapport with them. That's, again, to put them at ease, because sometimes people get really nervous. So this kind of breaks the silence and puts someone, encourages responses and puts someone at ease. You want to pay attention and use active listening skills and techniques. Again, use open-ended questions to find out what you want to know. And you also might want to use close-ended questions when you're verifying what they said. They might explain something to you, and then you might just ask them, okay, this is what you meant, and then you just want a yes or no, just so that you're both on the same page. Ask for proof. You might want documentation, and then that prepares the interviewee and your subject or your employee what kind of documentation might be necessary to verify that what you say you're doing, you're actually doing. To add any pivot questions when necessary. Ask follow-up questions if non-conformities are found. So if there's a policy that says we do this, but the technician says we do something differently, why? And is it just an out-of-date policy, or is there's a process that needs to be added or changed? And then end your interview by asking the subjects if they have anything else to share. And then at the end of the interview, you want to summarize the results to the interviewee and inform again them of any nonconformities that were found, discuss them. You might ask for some additional information, and you want to ensure that the interview provides enough information. Is there enough to pass the audit if one's done today? What was done well? What could be improved? Does it meet the standards of the audit? And again, after your interview, it's really important to include any specific details in your notes, such as like work areas, serial numbers, revisioning, what software is used. So those are things that you can go back to and document if there are any questions, or if there are additional things that could be done to improve their cyber posture. And if you're interviewing multiple people about the same activity, note any different answers for the same questions, and then follow up to get the real facts to make sure who's on the same page. Because again, these audits are meant to make sure A, you have a good cyber hygiene and posture, and B, to ensure that you're conforming to what your company says you're doing. So if you have 3 different people with 3 different answers, there's a problem. So either there's training necessary, or you need to have a meeting to discuss who's responsible for what. And I think that's it for here, and like Jen and I put this together, and maybe we can go through this. Like we like to put little company scenarios together. So it asks the students, Acme is preparing for the CMMC audit and are preparing for the evaluation of the employees' security awareness of risks and their activities and roles. The information security related training required for employees to carry out their duties and responsibilities will also be audited and assessed. So some things to get your students to prepare for the audit, like what would be the goal of the interview, who should be interviewed and why, what types of questions should be asked that directly address the objective of each practice for a specific capability, and then what type of data or documentation should you collect. So you can come up with a series of scenarios and ask students to think like an auditor on the other side of the fence. So they can not only be the interviewee, but they can also be the auditor. So it's good to give them different perspectives. So if they do become the interviewee, they understand the stance of the auditor and why they're trying to collect the information. But I think that's it for interviewing. Does anyone have any questions or any experiences you'd like to share with auditing or the interview of an audit? Okay, so I will take that silence as no. Okay, so I will move on. The next thing we want to do is talk about one of the first domains. So we're going to look at personnel security, and these activities are concerned primarily with developing processes to ensure that your personnel are adequately vetted to perform their assigned roles that require access to CUI. Again, it's all about protecting your CUI. So there's two capabilities within this domain. The first is to screen your personnel, and the second is to protect your CUI during their actions. So again, if we look at, let me pull this dashboard up. So if we look at personnel security at the end, we have two. So we'll look at this in just a minute, but how do you document that? And we'll look at what that means. But at level 2 for screening personnel, you have this value or this practice. And the practice is to screen individuals prior to their ability to authorize or get access to organizational systems containing CUI. So the really cool thing about this PowerPoint is that we can look at the audit objective. So it ensures that all your individuals are screened prior to authorizing access to your CUI systems or systems that contain CUI. What kind of evidence is there? Well, what does your policy say? What do your procedures for addressing personnel security say? What are some records? Do they have records that they actually indeed got screened? Are there system security plans? Where is it included in the plan that your employees are going to get screened? The employees that are dealing with CUI are getting screened. So when you're talking about personnel security screening or what vetting activities, they include maybe evaluation or assessment of an individual's conduct, their integrity or judgment prior to authorizing the access. You can also do, screening might include a background check or drug testing. So those are things that your company will have to identify as what types of screening you're going to do and perform on your employees before they have access to the CUI. So where to look, let's see, you can look at your security policy, like we said before. You can look at your records. When someone gets terminated, is their access revoked? You know, those types of things that you want to make sure that are being addressed. Who are you going to interview? Any personnel with personnel security responsibilities or with those information security responsibilities. So you might talk to system network administrators or account management managers or personnel security, HR. And then to evaluate or test any kind of organizational process for restricting personnel screening. So you might have automated mechanisms for supporting or implementing personnel transfer notifications, or again, the access or revoking authentication, or any types of mechanisms in place for disabling access to information that former employees might have. So that's the first domain and the capability and practice. I know we're going through different lexicon with the update to 2.0, but for now we'll just do that. The second capability under this domain is to protect CUI during personnel actions. And what that means is that, so you're going to ensure your organizational systems that contain CUI are protected during and after personnel actions. So if someone's transferred or someone's terminated, that's where you want to make sure that you protect the CUI. So you might have property that includes hardware authentication tokens or identification cards, or anything with building passes. Those are things that you can do to revoke or take away if they are terminated. You might have exit surveys or interviews to ensure that individuals who have been terminated understand what security constraints are on them or being imposed, and that they're aware of any kind of requirement to return system related property. And that you want to ensure that employees no longer have access to the CUI if they change their job role, pertinent CUI to that job role, or if they leave the company completely, you want them to have no access to it. So you'll take all the company IT equipment, like their laptops or their cell phone, any kind of storage device, any kind of identification cards or access keys. And during your exit interview, you will, most companies will let their, or remind their employee that they have an obligation not to discuss the CUI that they've talked to, even after their employment is over at that company. So an audit objective is to have a policy and or process for terminating system access and any credentials coincide with personnel actions as established. System access credentials are terminated consistent with personnel actions when they're terminated or transferred, and the system is protected during and after personnel actions. So some questions you might ask yourself: does the company disable information systems access prior to the employee termination or transfer? Do they revoke it within a certain time frame? So you just want to make sure that your CUI is covered. Some acceptable evidence, again, similar. You'll see the same types of documentation and methods. So there's some harmonization there. So if you document one practice and policy, you can probably leverage that for a couple others. What are the records of exit? What are the records of termination? How do you revoke authentication and credentials of your employees? And who do you talk to? So you talk to employees with personnel security responsibilities like before, your system network admins, anyone with information security responsibilities. Oh, I don't want to go through that fast. And evaluate your organizational processes for personnel transfer and termination, your mechanisms for supporting or implementing personnel transfer and notifications. Make sure that people know when someone leaves the company so that their account can be removed or modified depending on if they got transferred or not. And that you wipe out all their old keys and all those types of safety controls and measures. Okay, so the next is awareness and training. Does anyone have questions about personnel security? This is pretty straightforward. Just ensuring people who have access to CUI should have access. People who leave or terminate or change job roles don't have access to that CUI. Okay, I'm going to take silence as a no, so we'll move on to awareness and training. And then we'll take a short break. So this domain covers the awareness and training activities in an organization. So there's 3 types that we're going to look at today. So it's simply to ensure that the staff are all aware of security risks associated with their activities and roles, as well as providing information of security related training that's required for employees to carry out their duties. So there's 2. There's one, does your employee base have a good understanding of security awareness and those activities? So are they aware of like the different ways to spot a phishing email? It's just general awareness, because you're as strong as your weakest link. So you want to make sure all your employees have a good cyber understanding and practice those basic safeguards. And then who is responsible in your IT department for job-related cybersecurity training? So if you manage a firewall, you want to make sure that your staff member who's managing that firewall, if you update it, has appropriate training, and that's built into your replacement plan, their training and ability to manage that new firewall in an effective way. So we're going to look at the conduct security awareness activities. Again, we have 2 practices to be aware of, one at level 2 and one at level 3. Again, that's going to be compressed differently based on how CMMC 2 pushes everything together. This first practice focuses on ensuring that everyone in the organization is made aware of the security risks associated with their activities. And of the policies and standards related to the systems that they use. So this is overall awareness training. And again, it's focusing purely on security for everyone. So there is an important distinction that will be made, and you'll see in just a little bit, is that there's general awareness training, and then there's role-based awareness, or I'm sorry, role-based training. So awareness training provides that general security training to influence our employees' behavior so they don't click on those links. Whereas role-based training focuses on the knowledge, skills, and abilities that your employee needs to complete a specific task or just their job in general. So if we look at the objectives for this, is that we want to identify the security risks associated with organizational activities involving CUI are identified, and that the policies, standards, and procedures related to the security of the system are identified, and that the managers and system admins and users of the system are made aware of their security risks associated with their actions, and that their understanding of the policies and procedures so that we can maintain a secure system. And again, like you might have a security training awareness and techniques based on how frequent your training is. So you might have different types of training throughout the year. One could be just how to identify a phishing email, like what not to click on in an email, what's good password practices and policies. You might have something in place for that, but educating your staff on why those difficult passwords are necessary is also important. So you might have different posters or pens or messages come out to your email or to your staff, depending on how you're going to train your staff on just general awareness. So this is determining, okay, what are the risks? What are your policies? And how are people made aware of the security risks of their actions? And then you have acceptable evidence. So where is it in your security awareness training policy? How frequently are you training your staff? What staff have had training? Is it annual? So you might be creating logs on who's been trained. You probably outsource a company to conduct the testing and training. And then you can use those analytics in the back end and upload those as an artifact. What are some relevant codes of federal regulations? What's your security awareness training curriculum and materials? Where are they housed? How often is training? You want to have your training records available. And when you're talking about who you're going to interview to document this practice, is that anyone that's responsible with the training of security awareness, anyone in information security responsibilities. You probably want a training team to understand where the vulnerabilities of your company are and like what would be best to train your staff on. So those, both your training staff and your security staff, anyone that has personnel composing the general system, user community, or anyone with the role-based awareness training should be involved or interviewed. And then when you test this out, you're going to look at any mechanisms managing the security awareness training and any of those role-based training. Again, we're going to differentiate between the two. One's very general. Anyone that's using the system, you want to make sure has that understanding of cybersecurity basics and the need for why it's important. And then we have our role-based training we'll talk about in just a few minutes. The second practice under this capability provides information security awareness training on how to recognize and report potential indicators of insider threat. And an insider threat could be anyone from an employee or contractor that has authorization for computing or network activities, but conducts malicious activity with that access. So you just want to make sure that your annual training contains references on how to identify and recognize and report potential insider threats. So if someone's not accustomed to working over 5 o'clock and they're there for the last 5 days working till 8 o'clock and they don't need to be, that could be a suspicious identifier for insider threat potentially, or someone that's completely always complaining about their job. So they might be a malicious insider. So those are things that you might want to do. So, or I'm sorry, that this practice is actually looking at. So it provides, you have to document that you're providing security awareness training to your staff to be able to recognize and report whether that there's a potential insider threat actor. So if I look at the audit objectives, again, Just what are some indicators associated with insider threat? They're identified. You have that training. And then you also want to know how to communicate that threat to employee or management concerns. And then, all right, so you want to make sure that you also have security awareness training on recognizing and reporting. So you identify and then recognize and report that potential threat actor. And that, to interview, sorry, anyone, again, these are going to be similar. Anyone that has security awareness training, anyone with responsibilities for basic security awareness training, and those with information security responsibilities. This last practice is under the conduct training capability. And it looks at ensuring that your users that have security related activities are trained to perform their jobs and their duties. So it ensures that your personnel are trained to carry out their assigned information security related job roles and responsibility. So for this, the audit objectives include ensuring that those duties and roles are clearly defined, responsibilities are defined, maybe in their job descriptions, that their information security related duties, roles, and responsibilities are assigned to designated personnel, and that the personnel are adequately trained to carry out their assigned information security related duties and responsibilities. So training really imparts the skills and knowledge. So it allows the staff that you have designated for these roles to perform a specific function. So it's really important. So these training programs can help identify any kind of skill gaps in your organization, and then have programmers train, or I'm sorry, programs or sending the employee out for training to reduce that gap.
So, an example of this might be, if the auditor came in, they might want to ask people, when did you obtain training, and check that the documents match that the person, went through some type of training, so that you're documenting that they actually were trained, right? And they might even ask, like, what kind of things were you trained on, right? In part of a security audit, there's always going to be a part where they interview people to find out, do they understand their roles and responsibilities, right? So it might be, getting a group of information, a group of people that are responsible for managing, let's say, the contract information, and basically interviewing them about their roles and responsibilities and their understanding of the practices that are used to protect that information, right? So,
Joe, I just saw your question about can you identify malicious insiders as intentional or unintentional?
Yes, definitely, right? I mean, an insider threat could just be someone that's, that's careless, right? They're careless, handling things, or leaving things on their desk that shouldn't be, or they're emailing things to people that it's accidental, but it's still a major threat to an organization, right?
Right. Well, I know. Can you go back one slide? I'm sorry, but I didn't catch this earlier because I saw your one. Yeah, right there. Because I mean, when you're doing an audit, you don't want to come back and say, well, you're negligent or whatever. It's more like it's a training side. But, sometimes, like you said, it could be a clean desk policy. Well, you went home, quick one night, you forget to lock things up or whatever. But it's still, does it fall into the negligent or, exploited, we understand, but the malicious, but sometimes it's just, we're in a hurry or we forget or, but you still gotta, yeah, okay.
That's the whole thing. What an audit is looking for is, do you have controls for that clean desk policy? So is someone responsible at the end of the day to check people's desk and document it? It might be a control.
Right.
So it's more that than it is, did someone leaves things on their desk one day? Because you're not going to capture all that, right? But you have a process to identify that, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So it's a person that's forgot to do the quality check. They're the negligent, but okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Let's see. So that was, I think that's the end of my presentation. So for the awareness and training, you have the general security, and then you have the role-based security. So Guillermo has the, how regular should training be held to be in compliance? Annually, every 2 years, etc.
The way I'd answer that one, there are some frameworks out there that, like, NIST published documents about training, what their recommendations are. But I think it really depends on the organization. Most organizations at least have training once a year, as part of like, an employer, training cycle. But for key personnel, it might be more than that, right? I mean, as an example, if it's the people handling the government contracts, well, you might want to have more for those individuals, right? Or you might, so it really sort of depends. And I mean, in general, I'd say that most organizations require general training once a year, and then role-based training really based on their job. Because role-based training, we got to remember, will change as operations change, right? So they may need to be retrained on different, procedures and processes and so on. So a good question, but I have a terrible answer. It depends, right?
And some of that, the NIST 162 says a lot of times the general security is annual, receive initial and annual training. So when you onboard an employee, you want to ensure that they have it then when they're onboarded, but also annually along with the rest of the employees.
Yeah, and Jonathan posted something, found this in a quick Google search, 4.0, provide awareness training focusing on recognizing and responding to threats from social engineers, advanced persistent. Yeah, so it basically even specifies what types of things should be in your training. Yeah. But again, it depends on your organization, right? It depends on how many contracts do you have? How much CUI do you have to handle, right? Every organization is a little bit different, but general training, I would say minimum of once a year is what you're typically looking for. Role-based training, it all depends on the situation. So, right. And by the way, training doesn't just mean classroom training or guided training, right? It can also be simulations. It can be drills. It can be, taking USB drive and sitting in the office and see if people, pick it up or look to see that it's marked with CUI and things like that, right? So it can be more than just classroom training, right? There can be other ways of doing training. It can be posters on the wall and things like that too, right?
Pens and paper. One thing I didn't mention too is that, like, when you do the interview, you can do it in a boardroom, but some people prefer to do the interview of the audit or the interviewee while you're doing the security audit at their job or work area to ensure that, like, to look at their processes in place and how they do things. So maybe that'd be one way they could see their, if there's an issue with the clean desk policy there too. So if you go to someone's workspace and they're not prepared for an audit, it might be too telling.
All right, I think we have one. Are you done in your section? Is that it?
I am. Thanks, John.
I got a big chapter to go through.
Yeah.
And I want to try to get you out of here in time for lunch. So, and this will be the last one for this morning. We'll take an hour lunch break and then pick it up this afternoon. Mike Messina will be covering some of the more technical skills this afternoon. So, I'm going to go ahead and open up mine. By the way, all of these PowerPoints and PowerPoint movies you'll have access to. They're up on here if you copy it down, and you can actually copy them individually too if you want them. So. All right, so let me share first. Oh, did I close it? Ah, damn it. All right, so I'm going to share first. No. Get it? Oh, can you see it?
We can.
Yes.
Oh, nope. Now it went down.
Okay, how do I switch screens with it? I
Oh,
forget.
yeah. Stop the share and then reshare. Or you can new share.
Okay. I thought you could change screens with it, couldn't you?
You know, I always just drag it into the screen I established. It can be wonky.
So you can't do that. So you can see it now?
Yep, perfect.
All right, so access control, probably one of the most important domains of all of them. I mean, to be totally honest, most of what you're dealing with CUI and contract information falls under this category, right? It's probably the most important one of all of them. So access control is the process of granting and denying requests to use information processing services, and enter company facilities. So we talk about access control, it's all encompassing. It's not just logical access control, it's also physical access control, right? And it's application access control. So they bundle all this in one, right? Okay. You can see basically the model where this fits in. And it is one of the practices in the lower levels. So this will be, within the lower levels. So the new numbering system for these, you can see it has the acronym. So AC is for access list, and it has the level. So level 1, 3.11 would be authorized access control. 3.12 would be transactional and functional access control. 3 would be external connections. I should say for the next one rather, which is 20, and then 21 would be control public information. All of those would be level 1 access control function. So in other words, everyone has to do this. Everyone that's going to apply for federal contracts is going to have to be certified in this, right? So then we look at each one of these. These are all the level 1 ones. So limit system access to authorized users, processes acting on behalf of the users, and devices including other systems. So if we look at the objective for this one, I mean, they're pretty obvious. I think all of us are pretty familiar with these, but authorized users are identified. Processes acting on behalf of authorized users are identified. Devices and other systems authorized to connect to the systems are identified. System access is limited to authorized users. System access is limited to processes acting on behalf of the authorized users and devices, right? So it's basically saying you have information out there. We need to identify which users need to get access to that information, what programs or applications are they going to use, and what devices are we going to allow them to access it with, right? That's the basic objectives for this section. Makes sense? I mean, this is pretty obvious stuff, but that's what you're basically doing here. Now, what types of assessment? I mean, this is all going to be pretty straightforward, right? It's going to be your policies and procedures, plans, your design documentation. So if you're designing the system for access control, those actual systems, and then showing the actual configurations that's allowing certain users to have access to specific resources, right? So it could be, in some cases, it could be file access, or it could be application access, right? You would want to show notification that if something goes wrong, you're getting alerts, right? Or log entries, right? If someone requested this, that's not allowed, right? You may even want to log successful attempts, right? Why? I mean, I've worked for a lot of organizations. Yeah, we always record, a failed attempts. It's someone trying to break into the systems, but a lot of them would require us to also do positive actions. Anyone know why? Why would you want to do that? Oh, are you doing it in chat? Let me see. All right. Well, the reason is, let's say you have someone trying to break in and they're trying to guess credentials, and then finally they actually get in. Well, that's more important to know they got in, when did they get in, and whose credentials did they use, right? So that's why it's just as important to have, both those negative actions and the ones where they're actually successful, right? Or unsuccessful and successful. All right. Inventory of access accounts. So who all has access accounts, right? List of transactions, separated or terminated employees, right? So who's been granted and now we've taken them away because they no longer work for us, right? Guidelines on conditions for groups or role membership. So you get access because you're a member of this group. Well, those things should also be provided in an audit, right? Inventory of disabled accounts and individuals associated with each, and maybe a reason why they were disabled. Maybe they moved to a different project, right? Or maybe you're in to a project at a point that they should no longer need access to that information. All those kind of things might be reasons, right? Access authorization records. So again, every time someone's been granted access, account management, compliance review logs, system monitoring logs and audit logs and records, directory of devices and systems authorized to access organizational systems. And then they just throw one general one out there, all relevant documents or records, right? Well, that's pretty vague, right? But it makes sense because there might be things that they didn't list here that would be applicable, right? And then, the interviews just make sense. It's like, who determines who gets access, right? Like the account managers, who makes the determinations, or the system owners, right? System and network administrators and personnel with information security responsibilities, right? A lot of times we'll call those the owners because they determine who gets access, right? The owner of the system doesn't mean that they legally own it, but that they control ownership of it based on who they give access to, right? Okay. And then evaluation test, well, you're just testing the systems that control access, right? So organizational process that manage system accounts and mechanisms for implementing account management, like lockouts and stuff like that, right? Maybe your biometric systems that identify the individuals and so on, okay? Number 2 is transactional and functional control. So again, this is limiting systems. So again, these are like the applications that need to access that information. Which applications are we going to give access to it and when and how, right? So that's what that one's all about. So it may limit the type of application, transactions and functions that are authorized. Users are permitted to execute, and system access is limited to defined types of transactions and functions for an authorized user, right? So we're dealing more with like programs that are representing the user to access data. Okay, acceptable evidence, same things it was in the previous one, basically, right? Except that we're now monitoring not the individual users, but the applications that they're using to access the information, right? And then you're going to interview people that set those things up, right? So people or personnel with access enforcement responsibilities, system and network administrators, personnel with information security responsibilities, and potentially system developers, because they'll design these systems to limit access. The applications will be designed so that they can limit access to certain types of information, right? So they may be added to the group. And then mechanisms implementing access control policies. So pretty straightforward. The next one is verify and control and limit connections to in use of external systems. All right, so same kind of thing here, but now these are all dealing with external systems, right? So connections to external systems are identified, use of external systems is identified, connections to external systems are verified, and so on. So external systems might be, let's say, a partner institution that you're sharing CUI or contract information with, and you're going to really want to limit this as much as possible, right? Because this is a major vulnerability. Now you got the argument between the two organizations who's ultimately responsible for this, right? But you'd want to show your side controls who gain access to those and what they are. And it doesn't have to be necessarily a partner either. It could be people connecting from a remote site to the main site, things like that. But it's external connections. Okay. Types of evidence. Well, of course, your policies and documents, procedures for addressing the use of external systems. So you may want to have ones that limit that. Terms and conditions for external systems, system security plans, list of applications accessible from external systems, configuration settings and associated documentation, system connections and processing agreements, and account management documents. Okay, so all of those things might be things that we would use, that we would provide in an audit. And as far as who we would interview, persons with responsibility for defining terms and conditions for external systems to access organizations' systems. And then, of course, your networking system administrators, and then personnel with information security responsibilities. And then again, mechanisms. So it's the same thing for the evaluation. And then control information posted or processed on public accessible information systems. This could be social media, it could be Google Drives, things like that. So the goal is individuals authorized to post and process information on public accessible systems are identified. Procedures to ensure CUI is not posted and processed on publicly accessible systems. A review process in place prior to posting of any content. That's a really good one. That's a really good one to know. Content on publicly accessible systems is reviewed. This is a control, right? So, we limit what's supposed to go out there, right? Then we restrict certain types of content from being publicly posted, but then we also check that it hasn't been. That's the controls, right? And then mechanisms are in place to remove and address improper posting of CUI. The one thing I think they're missing there is it should be removed and addressed, but it should also be reported, right? Because I think most auditors are going to want to know, okay, you found this. Was this documented and reported? So, these things, you can prevent these things from happening in the future. Okay, documents. You can see all these documents are pretty much the same throughout. They're just different, dealing with different aspects of your system, right? So these would be all the different documents dealing with publicly accessible information, right? So it could be logs, could be records, training materials on what's appropriate, what's not, list of authorized users to post publicly, so on, right? A lot of organizations will block a lot of this too. So you might have that, how you're blocking it. People interviewed are the personnel with responsibilities for managing publicly accessible information posted on organization systems, and personnel with information security responsibilities again. And on all of these, the evaluation is the same thing. Then these are all the level 2 controls. So the first one is control CUI flow. So you control the flow of CUI in accordance with approved authorizations, right? Separation of duty. So separating the duties of individuals to reduce risk of malevolent activities without collusion. Least privilege, employ the principle of least privilege, including for specific security functions in privilege accounts. Non-privilege account use. So use non-privilege accounts or roles when accessing non-security functions. And then privilege functions. Prevent non-privileged users from executing privileged functions and capturing execution of such functions in audit logs. All right, so the first one basically deals with the flow of CUI. So what are we talking about there? Information flow policies are defined. So in other words, if it needs to go from point A to point B, or from point A to point Z, what are the points in between that there should be checks and authorizations? Methods and enforcement mechanisms for controlling the flow of CUI. Designated source and destination. So networked individuals and devices for CUI without the system between interconnecting systems are identified. Authorization for controlling the flow of CUIs are defined, and approved authorizations for controlling the flow of CUI are enforced. Okay, so when we say flow, it's a complicated one, right? Because information may have to go from point A to point Z, but certain people along the way may need to know about it, but others may not. So that one can get much more complex when we start talking about flow control. Acceptable evidence, policies, procedures, and plans, and, design documentation are going to be part of all of this, right? Procedures addressing information flow enforcement. Again, notifications and logs, list of information flow, authorization list of transferred, separated, or terminated employees so that they get off those lists. System baseline configurations, account management compliance, review logs, system monitoring records and audit logs and records, and then other relevant documents to catch all. And then these are the individuals you would interview, pretty much the same. And of course, the test and evaluation is the same according to them. Anyone recognize this stuff? Where are they pulling a lot of this from? A lot of this is coming from the NISPA special publications, right? On access control. In fact, pretty much all of it is. And then that's built into the 171 framework, right? All right, so I think we all get the idea of what separation of duty is and why we have that. And we can do things like, separate roles and responsibilities, but we can also do things like, forcifications and enforce cross training of specific tasks, right? Again, the objectives is that the duty of individuals requires separation are defined. Responsibilities for duties that require separation are assigned to separate individuals, so you need to show that. And then access privileges that enable individuals to exercise the duties that require separation are granted to separate individuals. So they want proof of it, right? They want to see you've identified what things need to have separate responsibilities. You've identified those and you've assigned the proper people to them. So again, policies, procedures, and plans, and your configuration settings, procedures addressing divisions of responsibility of separation of duties. Again, notifications if there's violations of it, list of divisions of responsibilities and separation of duties, system access authorization, system monitoring records and audit logs, and then other relevant documents. So before we go on to the next one, can anyone give me an example of separation of duty where you've worked in a company or something you teach students? What duties might you separate? Anyone?
John, it's Stan. So if you're in software development, you may have a separate group, not yourself test the software. I mean, that's one simple example.
Really, that's a good example. And that could almost go for anything that you create, right? So let's say you're configuring a firewall, right? The person that configures a firewall and the person that does the quality check should be different, right? Right. How about an example of the person that implements your access control accounts and privileges? And should you have someone that goes and audits those accounts and privileges?
Yeah, and somebody else that may authorize them.
Yes, exactly, right? So I mean that's examples of where you want two eyes on things, because I mean if you're the person authorizing, how do you know that the person followed the list? They didn't just let other people in, right? Okay, so that's sort of the back and forth, and a lot of times you'll have two-way where they're checking each other's kind of things, right? And it's not that you're not trusting someone, but these are controls again to make sure what you're doing is working, right? Okay, but you're not trusting. This is true though. So trust but verify, right? Individuals, again, same people. These really don't change much throughout, but it's part of the process. So least privileges, I think we all get the idea, right? You only give people the privileges that they absolutely need to perform their task, right? And that can be done individually or as groups. And that's what the objectives will basically tell you, right? So privilege accounts are identified. Access to privilege accounts is authorized in accordance with the principle of least privilege. So you don't give people access to things if they don't need it. Security functions are identified, and access to security functions is authorized in accordance with the principles of least privilege. And I think this is pretty straightforward. The least privileged one, there's a lot of stuff, right? So of course you have your policies and procedures again. You have your procedures for addressing account management. Again, you're gonna have all your lists now, right? Your list of users, your groups, information flow, list of recent disabled accounts, access authorization. You know, I was on one of the committees when they were writing one of these, and we just kept coming up with this laundry list. And then we're like, well, wait a second, you got to combine some, because some of these are really the same thing, right? Otherwise, it just becomes, you know, overwhelming, and it's hard for someone to use this then to actually, you know, do the implementation. But this one is pretty long, and you notice that they do separate the list of accounts and so on with the list of system-generated privilege accounts and list of system administration personnel, and then all of it, other relevant documents. So, all right, interviews will be the same pretty much, and same thing with the testing. Okay, and then use of non-privileged accounts or roles when assessing non-security functions. So that really is doing two things, right? It's saying these people don't have security access, and that the information that they're gathering doesn't have implications with our CUI or contract information, right? Because there may be a lot of that, right? 90% of your stuff, or probably even more than that, might be things that don't have anything to do with CUI or contract information, right? So it's identifying the difference, which ones are and which ones aren't, right? So non-secure functions are identified. Users are required to use non-privileged accounts or roles when accessing non-secure functions. And oh, I skipped one, didn't I? So these are the documents that would be needed. And interviews are going to be the same. Evaluations are going to be the same. Then the next one is prevent non-privileged users from executing privileged functions. Pretty important, right? And capture execution of such function in a log, right? So, you know, this one would be now to identify privileged functions, right? And again, have some kind of triggers or logs when someone with non-privileged accounts tries to access one of those functions, right? So privileged functions are defined, non-privileged users are defined, non-privileged users are prevented from executing privileged functions. Pretty straightforward, right? And then you have some type of way of logging that. And again, the documents are going to pretty much be the same as they are throughout access control, and then these are always the same. Okay, and look at this, there's actually even more of these. So this is a big domain in CMMC. So the next group of layer 2 ones are unsuccessful login attempts, privacy and security notifications, session locks, and session terminations. So hopefully we all know what these are, right? So unsuccessful login attempts, I think everyone knows what that is, right? Someone tries to log into their account and they're prevented, right? And at some point we might clip them so the account's disabled for a certain period of time and they can't access it, right? Privacy and security notifications, you want to provide privacy and security notices consistent with applicable CUI rules. So, you know, labels and ways of letting people know that this is not for general consumption, right? Session locks, use of session locks where pattern hiding displays to prevent access and viewing of data after a period of inactivity, okay? So, you know, a person sits at their desk, idle over a certain period of time, it will lock out that session or kill that session, right? Session terminations, these can be automatic, a user session after a defined period, okay? And I think most people get what these are. I'm gonna go through these pretty quickly. All right, and then the next group goes into access or control remote access. So monitor and control someone remotely accessing a session. Remote access confidentiality. So employ cryptographic mechanisms to protect the confidentiality of remote access sessions. That can be a two-way thing too, right? In this case, we're protecting, it could be their IP address or their actual credentials have to be transmitted securely, so someone can't, do like a man in the middle play or whatever to gain access to them, right? But in some cases, we may even prevent connections that don't have these mechanisms, right? So we'll just block them. Remote access routing. So where can they enter from, right? How is the traffic entered? What are the entry points? And then privileged access, remote access, authorizing remote execution of privilege commands and remote access to security relevant information. That's a big one there, right? Because you got to be really careful of who you're allowing to access these things remotely, because you always have those threats of man in the middle or someone gaining access to someone's privileges remotely, right? That's a big one. So here to get into, we're trying to determine remote access sessions are permitted, the type of permitted remote access are identified, remote access sessions are controlled, they're monitored, and remote accesses are then permitted based on credentials. Same people basically would review these, and then remote access for confidentiality. So what we're trying to do here is cryptographic mechanisms to protect the confidentiality of remote access sessions are identified, and cryptographic mechanism to protect the confidentiality of the remote access sessions are implemented. And you're going to get more into the, the policies and procedures, but the people that actually configure these things in. And then the whole routing aspect of it. So managing access points are identified and implemented, and then remote access is routed through the managed points, right? And we can use things like access list and things like that to flow, make sure that the information flows properly into the organization. Documents, and then these will be the same again. And then this is the big one. So privilege command authorized for remote executions are identified. Security relevant information authorized to be accessed remotely is identified. And then the execution of identified privilege commands via remote access is authorized, and then that you're going to monitor it, right? Look at, and we now have the last group, which is the wireless. And this is a big one nowadays with wireless and mobile devices, right? So the first one gets into the whole idea of wireless access authorization. So authorizing wireless access prior to allowing such connections. And this is just common practice in most organizations today, right? Because a lot of organizations connect all their devices through wireless means now, just because of the performance and the higher levels of security now, right? Protect wireless access using authentication and encryption. Mobile device connections, control connection of mobile devices, encryption of CUI in mobile devices. So encrypt CUI in mobile devices in mobile computing platforms. So someone gets that device, they can't access the CUI. And then portable storage, limit the use of portable storage devices, to store CUI or FCI. Okay. And I'm going to fly through these because we need to go to lunch here. And that's access control. I think, most of you know this is going to be a big one. And probably one of the most important ones of all of CUI. So, probably of all the ones I would spend time on, and I'm sure you do this in your classes, this is probably one of the most important concepts, and then teaching the tools and technologies that control this are probably one of the most important things we teach in our classes. So, all right, that is it. We are going to break for lunch.